Hello and welcome to What's Up with Energy, a gridX podcast. I'm your host, Georgia Knapp, and today we are going to be talking about more of the legal side of the energy industry. And joining me today is gridX's own legal expert, Ina. So Ina, I guess if you can just introduce yourself, what exactly it is you do at gridX, because I do kind of know, but I feel like you do even more than I realize.
So hi, I'm Ina. I'm the lead legal in gridX. So everything which goes along with paragraphs is in my field of responsibility, meaning every kind of contract, every kind of official letter from some authorities or whatsoever, but also kind of regulatory stuff coming up to be evaluated in favor of gridX and all that stuff. And also when management team has some questions about, is it legal to do something like that? Should we really go in this direction or whatsoever? All these kind of questions I will answer.
Is your position something every energy tech company has, or is it just like a nice to have position?
Wow. No, certainly to have legal support, and internal legal support is absolutely valuable because it's not only about being compliant and act compliantly in regards to all regulation out there, and there's a lot. Energy is, of course, one of the most regulated markets in the industry, towards industries. But also just to be on the safe side, to have a kind of practical guidance on how to act, what to do, and how to act correctly. And internal legal support is definitely worth having.
Okay. And is this like the type of law you had originally gone into and studied? Would it be energy law or tech law?
It was about economics and law. So a kind of more or less every field of law you need to work in a company, from labor law, for example, competition law, contract law, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But then, law is always evolving and regulatories are evolving. You always need to adapt. And at some point in time, I found out that energy and energy law is quite an interesting and impressive field of law because it changes a lot. And also it kind of has something good for society because it drives in the right direction, at least in Europe.
And so obviously today we're going to be talking about a lot of German law, German regulation, also some European-wide. Day to day, would you say that you work more with like German regulation or EU-wide regulation?
So it's not so easy to answer because day to day, obviously, one of our main markets is Germany. In fact, so my kind of day to day work is related to German stuff, German contracts, advising German managing directors of the company. On the other hand, as more or less every German law is based on European law,
Yes.
you can just see what happens in the EU will sooner or later also be effective and available in Germany. So when I think of my day-to-day work, it's like, of course, I look in the German laws when I need to advise someone. But on the other hand, giving the kind of bigger picture, you always have to look at the European law side as well.
Okay. And so then diving into the EU side, the EU's energy transition is increasingly driven by top-down legislation, as you were just saying that Germany obviously has to follow what the EU does. Do you see member states as converging toward a unified regulatory framework, or is national fragmentation still the dominant pattern?
So first, we need to differentiate between two kinds of laws which are on a EU basis. So on the one hand, there are EU regulations, and on the other hand, there are EU directives. So the regulation, like for example, GDPR is a very prominent one because everybody obviously knows. The regulation is that kind of law which is applicable when released by the EU Commission to all member states as it stands then. So
no exceptions.
No exceptions. Okay. So it's a European law directly applicable in all European countries.
Okay.
On the other hand, there are EU directives. Like, for example, NIS2 is a very current one, which is very prominent also right now in the energy sector. And this is a directive. And a directive is a law which needs to be ratified. So there's a European version released by European Commission, but then all European countries have to ratify the law to bring it into application in the European country. So there will be implementation laws in every single European countries. So it will become effective in the European country after the implementation into local law.
And just to make sure I understand, and then that European country can also modify it to like fit?
To a certain extent. Okay. So this is what happens regularly because different European countries have, of course, different sets of laws in the countries already in place, which means that if there's a EU directive coming out, you need to see how it fits into your legal framework you already have in the country.
Okay.
And there are kind of stricter rules in this country, like Germany or, for example, Spain. They have very strict privacy laws. And then when you have something coming from a European side, you need to see how you fit in all these different laws to still make your local set of rules fit together. And therefore, sometimes there are directives which are implemented stricter or slightly modified than the EU directive, for example, tells you so. So if we're talking about fragmentation, certainly this is the biggest difference, regulation versus directive. And when we talk about directive, it's also not 100% comparable in each country.
Okay. And then, in your opinion, which recent EU energy market reforms do you believe will have the greatest impact on distributed energy resources?
So I see two kind of flows, two kind of routes we are taking right now in the very regulated energy market. On the one hand, we're talking about all these IT security laws. So when we're talking about the energy market and what the EU aims for is there's a triangle. So on the one hand, you have the supply security. So energy supplies need to be secure in the entire European Union. Then you have cybersecurity, and then you have grid stability. Only when all of this works smoothly together, we have a stable energy system in the entire EU. So when we're talking about stabilities in all these directions, we mainly talk right now about cybersecurity. NIS2 and Cyber Resilience Act are two examples of very current laws of the EU to be implemented into German law. NIS2 is a directive. In Germany, for example, it came into effect at the end of December last year. And in the contrary, Cyber Resilience Act is a regulation which will come into effect later this year, becoming fully effective September next year. And this applies then directly in all countries. So from this triangle, supply security, grid stability, and cybersecurity, from what I see right now, cybersecurity is certainly one of the most important aspects.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, and what we see for the energy sector especially, is that we're talking much about flexibility. So there is a clean energy packet out there from the EU, which contains a couple of regulations, like the red directive, which is renewable energy directive, going in the direction of how much percentage do we need in renewables in the European Union. And the clean energy packet also includes regulations and directives on market formats, market communication, how can we share energy within the EU, what are all these players, what kind of roles do they have, etc. And taking all these kinds of laws together, flexibility and the change of the market to have more decentralized assets also coming into the market are, for me, one of the drivers for now in the regulations.
And with the NIS2, just because you've been mentioning that a few times now, and so that is a regulation. No,
a directive.
A directive. Oh my God. So that's a directive that all countries, like, they can implement it sort of in their own timeline. Am I correct, though? Isn't Germany one of the first that will be implementing it?
So the first kind of bigger country.
Okay.
There are smaller countries like Belgium, for example, who already implemented it. But the bigger countries like France, Spain, Italy, they didn't yet. And Germany, we also had some kind of delay in the legislation process due to the change of the government and new elections and all that stuff, which always causes a delay in the legislation process as well. So we also had a delay because normally the law had to be implemented by October 2024. And now we released it December 2025.
Oh my God. That's a big delay.
Yeah.
The reason why I was asking that, though, is because I think when paragraph 14A also came into effect in Germany, my understanding is that we were kind of testing it out, or other countries were watching how we handled the update to paragraph 14A to then see if they wanted to implement it. Does that tend to happen a lot, where Germany is sort of like the first big market to implement a directive and then others see how Germany does it?
At least it seems so.
Okay, it's not like a standard.
No, it's not a standard, and it's not like a common rule or something.
Okay.
But of course, as Germans, by cliché, plus the setup, for example, in the energy market with all the techniques we have, smart meter gateway, and all that stuff is very kind of high level and high standard. Okay. So other countries might have a look at what we are doing, because they need to see if this is feasible also in their countries and fits to their framework, from a technical side as well as from a regulatory side.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, because when I learned about paragraph 14A and now the NIS2, I was just curious why Germany would kind of always be the first. As digitalization is pushing more control, intelligence to the grid, what legal challenges arise when we have thousands of DERs start acting as regulated grid participants?
The market itself becomes more and more complex, which is quite challenging for all market players. When we're talking about the energy market and how it all fits together, you need to be always aware that there's not only this one producer with his small-scale PV on his roof or his battery storage in his apartment or house, but this is one of the players we have in that game, but also we have a metering point operator, we have a DSO, we have a TSO, and then we have the energy market supplier. And all of these players need to come together in order to make the system work. And what I mentioned before, in regards to grid stability, it's always about grid stability, because if the grid, and we saw it now in Berlin, we had the blackout in Spain last year. If the grid is not stable, we all will, sooner or later, face a kind of blackout, and therefore, grid stability is the most important argument towards having all these DERs included in the market on a very stable level, and all what we see from a regulatory perspective right now, 14A, you already mentioned it, we have 9EEG as well. So all these kinds of laws try to assure from a regulatory perspective, obviously not from a technical perspective, because they just set the legal framework to assure grid stability. But this is what all these laws are aiming for, that the inclusion of smaller DERs is grid friendly and not harming grid stability.
And then what legal frameworks do you see acting as bottlenecks for aggregators and virtual power plants to work cross-border?
For me, from a bottleneck perspective, the European-wide setting of formats, of standards, this is certainly something which is challenging, not impossible, but you also need to take into consideration that a European legislator like the European Commission, they don't think of industries. They think in a very much broader scope. For example, when we're talking about critical infrastructure, obviously we as gridX, we see the energy part of it. But critical infrastructure is also telecommunication, transport. It's about food and all that stuff, and therefore, the laws in regards to this they are not specific to one type of industry. Also, NIS2 or Cyber Resilience Act or whatsoever, they are not energy specific. We can kind of interpret it in our favor and see what we can take off this laws for us in the industry, in the energy sector, but also for other critical infrastructures. These laws apply vice versa,
To what extent can EU-level policy accelerate the adoption of smart charging, vehicle-to-grid, and local energy systems?
So, as mentioned before, we see the clean energy package or packet in the EU. This contains certain different directives and regulations, and there's a kind of overarching goal of the European Union, and this is to fight climate change, or this is to achieve climate change, and the EU legislation goes exactly in this direction. So when we're talking about energy legislation, there's also a concept for the energy market design, which is done from the European Commission, and that sets the rules and kind of main points in order to achieve what the EU is aiming for. And for example, vehicle to grid, and also to include these small DERs into the grid. This is done by the EU, but in different laws and different directions. It's not focused on this one big law
Yeah.
which makes it all happen, because it has so many layers, starting from the task of all these market players, from market communication, from energy sharing cross-border, from setting guidelines for cybersecurity and all that stuff. So putting all this together, including renewable energy sources, this is the challenge of the EU, and it's not possible to do it in one law.
Yeah. I mean, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Way too many countries. Just before we finish up the episode, I do want to dive a little bit more into NIS, because that's obviously NIS2. Was there a NIS1?
Yes, it
okay,
was.
there was a NIS1.
I would just tell you something about the background and how
Yeah.
it evolved. Yeah.
No, that's great, because that's I know that's going to be a pretty big topic for us this whole year. So, yeah, if you can explain to the listeners what NIS2 is, what I guess NIS1 also.
Yep. So NIS stands for Network Information Security. It's a directive, not a regulation.
Okay.
So it needs to be implemented and ratified into local law. NIS1 was a kind of high-level set standard for network information security.
Also a directive.
Also a directive, and it was the kind of baseline on how cybersecurity needs to be implemented in critical infrastructure in the European Union.
Okay.
But only a very few players were really affected, like the very big nuclear power plants, or very big energy companies. They were affected by NIS2, but by NIS1. But what NIS2 is now aiming for is to go pretty much more in detail. You know, like the thresholds for applicability or to fall under this law are by far lower than what NIS1 was. So, for example, in Germany, the threshold is if you are working in critical infrastructure, energy, transport, telecommunication, food, and all that stuff, you already fall under it if you have more than 50 employees, more than 10 million euro revenue per year, and you are in this kind of sector. So pretty much more companies will fall under NIS2 than under NIS1. And this is what makes the big difference. And when we look at gridX right now, obviously we fall under it.
Yeah.
And then, as mentioned earlier, we have this cybersecurity approach from to save the grid from instability, from attacks from the outside. And now it's not only about the big players, but we have more and more small DERs in the grid.
Yeah.
And therefore, the grid is by far more affected by attacks than it was earlier. So when we had only like 10 nuclear power plants in Germany where the energy was coming from, obviously there was a big danger for them to be attacked.
Yeah.
But now when we think about millions and millions inverters in homes which might be attacked at some point in time.
A lot more entry points now.
Absolutely. And there's another kind of danger than we saw before. And therefore, now the law also had to change. And NIS2 is exactly aiming in this direction and adapting legislation to the actual market. And this is an interesting change which also happens. You know, it's not only that a legislator set rules and laws, but it's also to make the legislator adapt the laws to actual reality.
Yeah.
We see that the market change, therefore we need different regulations. And this is a perfect example here, because energy market is changing, obviously. We're aiming for more flexibility. We're aiming for more connectivity of all players in the market and all assets in the market. And therefore also the law needs to change. And this is where we see NIS2 to be a very important factor in this game, because NIS2 is aiming for cybersecurity of the companies itself. So it's not about a single product, but the company behind a product needs to be compliant. For us, it means that we need to set up an information security management system. A very kind of popular example is to get the certification ISO 27001. We also need to implement a business continuity management. So all companies affected by NIS2 need to set a system internally in order to prove compliance with all these legal requirements. And getting an external certification is certainly one way to do it. And with NIS2, it's not only to show and to prove compliance by a certification or by the setup and documentation of the information security management system, but it's also to align on processes and reporting lines and communication possibilities to authorities in order to make authorities aware of incidents and cyber attacks. So there's very rough and tough rules on when to report something where. And you also need to show that there are processes in place internally which allow the managing directors or the persons in charge for information security in a company, like a CISO, for example, to become as early as possible aware of a cyber attack or an incident in the system, in the company. And then you're obliged to report this kind of attack to a public authority in the European Union.
Okay. Do you think NIS2 will, because 14A, at least for Germany, was a big topic for at least the past 2 solid years. Do you think NIS2 is about to become like the next like really big buzzword topic?
I guess NIS2 in combination with Cyber Resilience Act, CRA, this will be most important this and next year, certainly, because it certainly changes the way companies might work.
Yeah.
And there's also another kind of threat seen by the European Union, the European Commission, for example, by inverter manufacturers. And there is discussions right now going on, like how to protect the grid best. And there's also a possibility, for example, in the German NIS2 implementation law, that critical components might be prohibited. So when at some point in time, someone decides that this and that component might be too critical to be in the grid or to be supported or supporting the grid in the future, then it might be prohibited. What does it mean for a PV owner and for his DER at home, and what is the consequence for the market then? Will the market change it in its entirety? And how many inverter manufacturers do you know from Germany or inside the EU?
And then my last question is actually about another, I think this is a German regulation.
We'll find out.
Who knows? MISPEL? Is that an EU directive or is that a German specific?
So MISPEL is also based on European legislation, part of the clean energy packet. But at the end of the day, MISPEL is very German.
Okay.
It's a set of rules set by Bundesnetzagentur.
Yep.
And MISPEL stands for Market Integration of Storage and Load. So talking about EVCS.
Okay.
And it goes in the direction of how we can include small battery storage and EVCS, so vehicle to grid possibilities better into our grid. And
Okay.
the question is, how to serve both interests, to serve the prosumer, the EV car, the EV holder, and the EVCS person in his or her home, and on the other side, to don't make the calculation and the documentation basis more complex as it is right now already.
Okay.
Because it's all about numbers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
How much do you produce? How much do you feed in the grid? How much do you get from the grid? And to balance it all, to document it all, and to calculate it, and also to invoice it at the later point in time, that's quite complex. And therefore, MISPEL tries to set some general rules, including an option where we're talking about pauschal, I don't know. There's a pauschal option included in MISPEL where we don't calculate actual feed-in or getting from the grid, but having the PV feed into the grid reimbursed like on a very generic level and not to actual consumption or feed-in.
The word you were just saying, was that a German word or was
It
that?
was a German word.
Okay. Pauschal.
Pauschal.
And we're totally in a different vocabulary for me now. I couldn't even tell you what the English legal word could possibly be. And do you think then MISPEL, for Germany specifically, will that be as big this year as NIS2 or as relevant?
No. So NIS2 is, of course, by far more important.
Yeah.
Because it sets some very general rules.
Yeah.
MISPEL will become more important when we see the smart meter rollout become even more and faster in Germany. Because this is for MISPEL. Smart meter rollout is certainly a bottleneck right now.
Okay.
And the MISPEL process is still ongoing. Therefore, it's not yet final. It's not yet released. This will come later this year.
Okay.
We expect it to be something second half, perhaps even beginning of 2027. So it will certainly not be a topic to become productive or effective this year, but more or less next year. But we now see kind of first movers in this direction, where we see more direct marketing. So MISPEL is also about allowing small-scale PVs to to be direct marketed.
Okay.
And therefore, you need to have some kind of service providers, direct marketers, to support direct marketing of small-scale PV. And for now, there are only a very few number of players in this market, direct marketing, even for small-scale PVs. But we hope that there will be more players in the market, so there's more competition and also more attractiveness for the market. And then potentially next year, MISPEL will become more popular and more of a hot topic than it is potentially this year.
Okay. This has been a lot. For one episode, I kind of realized now maybe we should have broken this into a few episodes. But thank you. This has been eye-opening. I now know the difference between regulation and directive. The rest, I think, is going to have to settle for a bit. I do have a few rapid-fire questions for you. My favorite one to always ask people is just, if you could be any distributed energy resource, which would you be?
APV.
Why?
Because it's close to the sun.
Nice.
It's about storing and making something good from the sun, and therefore also kind of try to support households and the grid.
This is a bit more this is more legal based. Which do you prefer more, regulation or directive?
Regulation.
Why?
It's clearer.
Yeah, I can see that. EU clarity or national flexibility?
National flexibility.
That was very fast. If energy law had one emoji, which one would you use the most?
Slightly smiling.
Slightly smiling. And then my last one would be, what is a legal myth that you hear all the time in energy?
Oh, it's not about energy, but there are, most people don't know the difference between guarantee and warranty, which drives me mad. And they use the terms the same, which they aren't.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's always about educating people about the difference.
Because I would take, just with the plain English words, guarantee means like it's certain, this is how it's supposed to work, whereas a warranty is more of a protection for you.
So more or less, it aims in the same direction. So warranty is what the legislator says a good or a product needs to be. So if you warrant that something will last for a couple of years or will have the same level of quality, this is what a producer, a manufacturer needs to warrant. A guarantee, which sounds more or less the same, and it's used more or less the same, is a voluntary uplift on the warranty, which the manufacturer or producer grants to an end customer, but it goes beyond what is legally the producer is obliged to grant.
And in German, is it the same, like the two, or do you guys have more specific words?
No, it's exactly the same.
Okay.
So it's warranty, it's what's in the law. We
Okay.
call it Gewährleistung in German.
Okay.
And guarantee is Garantie. But people mostly treat it the same when they use it in day-to-day communication. But from a legal standpoint, it isn't. So,
Well, thank you.
2 takeaways now.
Yeah, 2 takeaways. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I feel like we should have you back on the podcast to explain more regulations and directives at some point.
Very happy. Thanks for having me.
If you'd like to learn more about the world of renewable energy or energy management systems, be sure to check out our website, gridX.ai, where we produce regular blogs and glossaries about the subject. You can also follow us on LinkedIn or on Twitter and Instagram at GetGridX.